Mind Control with Chase Hughes. Quickly, let's talk about how mind control got its start. And a lot of us have heard of Project MK Ultra. It was a really badass program that started initially under the flag to do the best for our country, to protect our country. We had soldiers coming home from the Korean War declaring that America was evil and that they pledged their allegiance to the Communist Party. And this was scary for Americans. This is extremely scary for our government. And we said, there is some secret out there to controlling human minds, and we are far behind the curve in finding out what it is. And it was scary. So we invested a lot of money, and MK Ultra was broke up into three larger programs. And those three larger programs were Operation Chatter, CHATTER, which focused solely on discovering what drug could be used as a truth serum. I'm going to move my mic here quick. I have a podcast mic duct taped to a tripod. It's pretty fancy. So Chatter was specifically designed to find a truth serum. And this is where we discovered all of the scientific research that was done on a chemical called sodium amytal, AMYTAL, which is a truth serum, which if you get phrase 7, the new book coming out, we use a couple of times, use a couple of injections of that in the book. And it was also about importing a massive amount of LSD into the United States. And there were 3 countries involved with all 3 of these programs, and that was the UK, Canada, and the United States. And all the countries were complicit in this, but the whole thing started with the director of the CIA at the time. His name was Allen Dulles, and he exempted people from financial control and restraint, and he did his best to try to remove all of the boundaries that people were typically faced with when we were working with experimentation on human beings. And the Project Chatter ran into several organizations, but the entire hippies movement of the 1960s, the CIA publicly claimed that they are responsible for somewhere around 80% of all LSD entering the entire country during the 60s. So a lot of that consciousness movement was part of the CIA's research, believe it or not. And that's all public. That's public information. Nothing you'll hear tonight is conjecture or opinion unless I say that it is my opinion. So everything here can be looked up. It's proven. If someone wants to talk about chemtrails or anything like that, I'm not your guy. You can go to Alex Jones for that stuff. So Chatter was all about drugs. One of the sub-programs of Chatter was called Project Midnight Climax. And Project Midnight Climax was held in a California brothel in the 60s. And in each one of the rooms where the sex workers would take a man, there was a 2-way mirror where the CIA researchers would watch as they administered LSD to the guy. And they would start to document these effects. Which is shocking to me, because in the 60s, it seems like there would be no shortage of people volunteering for mind-altering drugs. So like you would have to dose some John pulling a prostitute into a hotel room. Seems a little silly. So I think a lot of these programs are run by people who are seriously lacking in ethics, and were probably pretty high scoring on the deviant behavior scale. So that's Project Midnight Climax. It's public record. And some of the young ladies who are now older are still around, and they're in some really good BBC documentaries about it. One of the other projects was called Bluebird. And Project Bluebird is one of my favorites because it focused on the use of hypnosis. And there were several doctors who were against the use of drugs on unwitting people, one of them being Dr. George Estabrooks, who was a professor of psychology at Colgate University in New York. And believe it or not, if you doubt me, just shoot me an email. I'll send you the proof and I'll send you the signed documents. He was involved with a guy named Milton Erickson, who frequently sent coded messages back and forth to each other. So Dr. Estabrooks wanted to create a program to split somebody's personality into two. And this is kind of where the Manchurian Candidate in real life comes into play. And I spent a lot of my life dissecting his techniques and improving those to where we could do this for therapy. We could do it for anything. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. But that whole hypnosis program, I went up to Colgate University. I talked to Dr. Estabrooks' daughter, who lives in Dallas now. And I was able to get a lot of his research journals, all the documents. I started a scholarship foundation in Dr. Estabrooks' name. And I got a whole lot of stuff that survived the CIA document destruction order, which we'll talk about it also in a few minutes. And he had split the personality of an Army officer first. It was his first experiment. And his point was that if I can manufacture another personality inside of this Army officer, I can give that other personality national secrets. So if that other personality is only activated by a certain key phrase, like "the moon is bright out tonight," which was the actual phrase they used in the Manchurian Candidate film, and it was the phrase that Dr. Estabrooks actually used in real life. If he can only be activated by that one phrase, the other personality that is, even if that officer walking through enemy lines was captured and tortured, that information would still be locked away somewhere in the recesses of that man's brain. And that's what started the Manchurian process. And he perfected it over the course of hundreds of experiments on people who were willing, who volunteered, who knew they were going under hypnosis. And Hippocratic oath or not, I think just being a good human being dictates that you do that stuff. We shouldn't need an oath for that stuff, but apparently it helps. And people live by that. A lot of doctors defer to the oath. But he also wrote an entire presentation to J. Edgar Hoover. I have these documents as well, where he wanted to capture and program a German submarine captain and give him multiple personalities, and then send him back to Germany in his submarine to torpedo the entire German fleet, which I thought was really cool. And it was an actual plan that he developed with the FBI and the CIA. And then he wrote a fiction book about it. And it's called Death in the Mind. If you want to look it up, I think it's on Amazon. Death in the Mind by Dr. George Estabrooks. And if you want to read a firsthand account that I think is a little bit dubious and a little bit stretchy of reality, it is this book here. It's called The Murder of Time. I'll give it close up here. Making and Unmasking a Sleeper. And I'm not an affiliate. I don't even know that dude. And I think he might have some mental illness. But there are some weird things that happen, which I'd like to bring up later and answer questions about. I have seen some strange similarities with mass shooters and their behavior before they commit some of these shootings. There is a very prominent, intelligent lawyer who graduated from Texas Tech University. His name is Myron May. And he's the guy who shot up Florida State University. Totally smart guy. And the day before he did it, he posted on his Facebook, has anyone else here, he posted it inside of a Facebook group, has anyone else here been encouraged, and this is a quote, I hate to start over the third time. Has anyone else here been encouraged by your handler to kill with a promise of freedom? Question mark. And I saw that when the Florida State University shooting happened, I think in 2015 or 16. And I started doing a whole lot of research and talking to people. And I got on a phone call with a guy named Dr. Colin Ross, who wrote a book called Bluebird about this process. And he's a psychiatrist who spends his whole life treating multiple personality disorder. He's a brilliant guy. He's a Canadian guy, but he lives in Austin, Texas. And he said you can manufacture multiple personalities very quickly. And I said, yep, I know. I've done it. And we'll talk about that and that process. So that's what Bluebird was. It was focused on hypnosis and focused on maybe using hypnosis to retrieve memories. And this is still in the day where remote viewing was viewed as something that was possible and something that was real. And they had a whole remote viewing program. And obviously it produced very little results. There's no more program in place. And they use hypnosis and interrogation. There's a whole article in the Estabrooks files of will people under hypnosis harm themselves, or how to make that happen? Can I make someone commit suicide after I activate a sleeper agent to go commit murder? I'm happy to answer questions about that too at the end. So that was Bluebird. And finally, we had another one called Project Artichoke. And Project Artichoke specifically dealt with different parts of the mind and integrating drugs, hypnosis, programming, all kinds of stuff, electroshock therapy, electrocution, mind reprogramming, induced comas, all kinds of horrible stuff. And Artichoke is basically asking the question, can we control a person without their conscious will, against their conscious will, in a manner that goes against self-preservation? So that's what that program was asking. It goes against self-preservation, which I was very interested in, because providing vital intelligence on a terrorist organization to the US is probably against self-preservation. And a lot of us, if I'm a therapist, in which I don't do clinical work unless it's like friends or family who need serious intervention or change or something, a lot of us get into habits about depression or eating or overeating or some kind of disorder. And that behavior, just me digging into the pantry at 2 a.m. and eating my kids' Reese's candy, if that happens to me on a daily basis, I did it last night, but if that happens to me all the time, that's a disorder. But that disorder becomes self-preservative. So if I understand how to make this process happen in a natural way with good intent, the self-preservation is you overeating. The self-preservation is this feeling of depression. Then I can make someone act against that. So that really interested me. And so the CIA teams up, they make up MK Ultra, they partner with the Army and Navy, naval intelligence specifically, for funding. So they start pulling a lot of funding pools out of the Department of Defense, and they used over 80 different shell organizations to approach scientists, hospitals, doctors, researchers, laboratories assistants. And this is between the US, the UK, and Canada. And the director of the CIA, Alan Dulles, is giving everybody carte blanche. You can do whatever you want. Go wild. Exact words, go wild. So most of the experiments, even the ones that were shocking people's brains, were done without the victim's consent or their knowledge. So if something like that was happening to you without really your full conscious awareness, that's what made people even more scared. Because if they volunteered for it, they'd be scared still. But not knowing it was going to happen and not knowing what's really going on and having that happen to you, it triples, or it's a 10x trauma for those people, which made them feel even more like they were going crazy. And one institute of note, I think I can see a couple of people in here who've already read Phrase 7. This institute called the Allen Memorial Institute. This is in Canada. And it was one of the most notable institutions that was used. And it was run by a man named Dr. Ewen Cameron, E-W-E-N, Cameron. And he believed, and I think he initially was well-intentioned in this. He believed that the human brain was like a computer, that it could be completely reprogrammed. And one of the notable victims of Dr. Cameron in Canada was a woman named Linda McDonald. And Linda was a young 26-year-old woman. She had just given birth and she was suffering from postpartum depression. So Dr. Cameron calls her up, and he's this big famous psychiatrist. And she's thinking, and this is from her own interview, she's thinking, why would he want to work with me? I have depression. She was so excited and enthralled to be working with Dr. Cameron. And within the first 2 days, they introduced her to 3 or 4 doses of LSD per day and massive amounts of electroshock therapy, over 47 times the highest recommended allowable limit by the American Psychological Association. So it's massively against the law, and it was without her consent, completely without informed consent or even asking if it's okay. And this was something that Dr. Cameron called psychic driving. That was his exact phrase for it. And with psychic driving, we can kind of erase this computer of the mind. And so while they are in repetitively induced comas, their eyes are pried open, just like in Clockwork Orange. And they're showed a TV right above their face that has messages on it. There's recordings. One of the recordings, according to one of the witnesses, would say, why are you continuing to shirk your responsibilities? Why are you trying to avoid your responsibilities? Over and over again. And this is not for a couple hours. This is for like 20 days at a time in an induced coma. And every time you wake up, you're given LSD. And every time you wake up, they put electrodes on your head and start shocking you. And it's a nightmare. So this was massive programming. He's trying to reprogram the brain like a computer. And this woman gets out. This woman gets released from the hospital. She's incontinent. She can no longer control her urine. She urinates on herself. She begins to make public does weird things in public, starts masturbating in public compulsively. She has no memories from the day she checked in back to the date of birth. They have erased every single memory from that entire life of that woman. She has none. Doesn't remember her family, her friends, nothing. And Louis Weinstein was another one of the victims. And he was a extremely intelligent guy, had a family. He loved music. He owned a business. And he was also an aspiring financial investor. He was pretty young, had a couple of kids. This was in the mid 1950s. And he just had a few panic attacks, 1 or 2 panic attacks. So he goes into the Allen Institute and talks to Dr. Cameron, and they did the same thing. They regress him back to this infant state, and they would give him LSD after LSD after LSD dose and continue to say, you're getting smaller, you're getting younger, you're getting smaller, over and over again. And in his testimony, he went to the court and filed a suit. And in his testimony, he said he went all the way back to before birth when he was in the womb and was never able to move forward from that. And he had no memories again, got his memory wiped out. And He never worked again a day in his life. He couldn't work. He couldn't hold a job down, and his family continued to trust the doctors at the Allen Institute. So then they check him back in and they say, oh, we can fix him. So then he checks back in, and he's further subject to sensory deprivation. They put these gel gloves onto his hands that were kept at body temperature. He's blindfolded, and he's kept in a room that's 98.6 degrees, which is body temperature for everybody in England. And sounds are played throughout the room so he can't hear anything. And you might think, wow, that would suck for a couple hours. He was in this chamber for 2 months without being let out. And his family finally filed a lawsuit, and the case settled out of court, and the CIA paid $760,000 each for 8 victims to share. $760,000 for 8 victims to share from the Allen Memorial Institute. So that's just one of the cases, and there's quite a few. And that MKUltra program officially ended in 1973 with the director surrendering under the Church Committee hearings under Congress. And if you want to look that up, they're all on YouTube. It's called the Church Committee. Just type in MKUltra Church Committee. But overall, I think MKUltra set out under very noble and very patriotic purposes, and then was run by a bunch of dipshit morons who had no ethics and just wanted to experiment. And this was right after we defeated the Nazis, and we were appalled by how they would experiment on human beings. And we had defeated them and then did the exact same thing. So it's a little bit disgusting. But I think the initial part of the program, especially with Dr. Esterbrooks, was well-intentioned to discover this wall and this technique that was being used on our American soldiers to brainwash them. And that's a kind of a recap of all of the things that happened there. And the key player in the entire MKUltra program was a guy named Sidney Gottlieb. And Sidney Gottlieb played the key role in funding, organization, and everything. And nobody was ever really punished for it. Nobody was taken to task. Nobody went to jail. I think a lot of those doctors should have served life terms in prison for just everything that they did. And there was one more guy. His name was Frank Olson. And if you've read the Ellipsis Manual, right in the very beginning, when it has a little disclaimer at the very bottom of that paragraph, there's a tiny little mention in there. It says, remember Dr. Olson, or remember Frank Olson. And Frank Olson was an Army virologist and bacteriologist who specialized in anthrax. And the CIA had recruited him into this program to come up with a bacteria to do mind control stuff. And he, in California, saw what was going on with this Midnight Climax project and saw the ethics violations. And story has it that he was due to give testimony to the Inspector General on Tuesday. And on Monday evening, he somehow randomly jumped off of his hotel room balcony and landed in the middle of the street. So for anybody who reads the Ellipsis Manual and you see those little GPS coordinates in there, one of those is the exact spot where he landed on the street. And it just goes to show that we never know who to trust.